Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on diverse learners, and especially those of you who are getting up bright and early in the morning, as some of our panelists are. My name is Laura, and I work for Outschool, and I also teach a few classes on Outschool. And with me is Julie. She is in San Francisco this morning, and she'll be helping me out with kind of the logistics and adding any input as needed. And so today we are privileged to have two Outschool teachers with us who have been with Outschool really for quite a while. Shaheen, I know, has been here longer than I have. So they both have quite extensive experience working with students from diverse backgrounds and who have different learning needs. And we're hoping that they can help us understand a little bit more about the challenges that some of these learners face, or some of the unique abilities that these students have, and ways to work with those students. And so our two guests today are Wieland and Shaheen Rasheed. And we will start by having them introduce themselves a little bit. Then we'll do a discussion based on some questions that we will pose for them. And then once we have a few questions, those of you who are joining us online, you can submit some questions to us, preferably through the Q&A, which you can see on the bottom of your Zoom screen. But you can also use chat as well. All right, so let's get started. Shaheen, can you introduce yourself to us? Tell us a little bit about your experience on Outschool and what you teach.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name is Shaheen Rasheed, and I've been with Outschool, I think, pretty much just when it got started. And I started off teaching my classes, as well as, and it was interesting because I'm right here in San Francisco. It was, a company out here in San Francisco, and some of the parents who were finding out about Outschool said, hey, rather than sit in traffic, in horrendous San Francisco traffic, why don't you consider Outschool? That's how I got to hear about Outschool, and I've been with Outschool since then, teaching my classes, although less frequently now because I'm also working. I have my master's in education, although I will say it's not in special education, but having a master's in education, having taught in the public school and the private school, and then I homeschool my own 4 kids, and 2 of them are now in college. But that being said, having that experience and also coming from the world of charter schools and homeschooling, different learners were kind of part and parcel of my teaching world and experience. And with Outschool, what I've been teaching have been more of the humanities courses. I teach classes to middle school and high school kids on literature. So I have a class on British literature starting up pretty soon. I teach classes on poetry discussion. A lot of my classes are on the Socratic style of discussing and dialogue. So I teach classes on critical thinking and logic. So kind of pre-philosophy classes, and a lot of them are quick one-time classes. Just a few have grown to become semester-long classes. But like I said, a lot of my classes are on by request because I don't have a lot of time, but have been enjoying it and can't just seem to let go. So even though, I have a million other things going on, I try to find time for Outschool because it's such an integral part of my life now. It's just been around for so long, and I enjoy it. So that's me.
I know the feeling of not quite being able to let go. Karen, can you introduce yourself, how you found Outschool, and what you teach?
Sure. My background originally was in vocal music. Long story, I ended up taking a job at teaching vocal music at an independent boarding school for boys who experienced dyslexia. And through a long and winding path, I ended up changing careers and becoming a reading specialist, and got a doctorate and ran a university reading clinic for a while. So I have a lot of experience working with kids who struggle with literacy acquisition and learning. And I joined Outschool 2 years ago when I moved my private practice to full-time. And I didn't expect Outschool to become such an important part of my teaching. I thought I would teach a few learners on Outschool, similar for the reasons that Shaheen suggested. You know, I wasn't having time to drive so far anymore, and it was nice to connect with students through an online platform. So I teach two basic strands on Outschool. One I call multisensory phonics. I'm a Wilson practitioner. That means I work with the Wilson reading system, an Orton-Gillingham derivative. And individual instruction is very pricey for kids who are seeking one-on-one. So I teach in small groups of ideally 3 to 4 students at a time who I try to carefully match. And a lot of my learners continue with me up a sequence for many courses as they continue working. And those are kids who really struggle, usually with word recognition and spelling and reading fluency as their main concerns. But I also teach another strand that's really fun for me. I call it vocabulary building with Latin and Greek roots and affixes. And that works with the sort of the higher layers of English orthography, the histories of words, and how we can see Greek and Latin and French roots play out in English spelling, and we can talk about those meanings. Now, a lot of the students in those classes also experience language-based learning difficulty. In fact, I would say about 3/4 of them actually struggle with spelling, and that's one of the reasons why their parents steered them toward that class. But then I also just have a lot of really word-curious students, and their difficulty with spelling does not impact their ability to enjoy the course and learn a lot. So.
All right, excellent. So one of our audience members has already asked a question, and it's basically one of the questions that we were planning on asking you as well. So can you both talk to us a little bit about your experience working with students with special needs or diverse learning backgrounds? Like, you know, why did you decide to do that, or how did you get into it, and how extensive is it? Those sorts of things. So Karen, I'm going to start with you, since you mentioned working at a school with kids with dyslexia. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and experience with that?
Sure. As I'd said, I was a vocal music teacher, and the school put me through its teacher training program, which is Orton-Gillingham based. And then eventually they needed me to pick up more classes. So I started teaching reconstructive language, which is the school's sort of Orton-Gillingham, their Orton-Gillingham derivative. And then went back for a master's and a doctorate. And along the way became Wilson credentialed. But I think maybe the heart of this question might be more, and correct me if I'm wrong, let's see who asked this question, Jane. Would you like to know more, Jane, about how to work with kids who have these difficulties, as opposed to how I learned how to work with kids who have these difficulties? Because those are sort of two different questions, right?
Well, she's probably typing.
Maybe why don't I assume the first? Because I think that's important. You had gotten us thinking before the meeting about some quick, easy ways that teachers can make. Oh, sorry. Now I'm seeing her message. Oh, to understand my frame of reference. Okay. So actually, that's an interesting question, Jane. My frame of reference actually started with a belief that a lot of reading teachers, conventional reading teachers around the country have, which is dyslexia is not really a thing. That dyslexia is just a reading difficulty, and that the only distinction between students who have garden variety reading difficulty and dyslexia is their parents' pocketbook, because getting a diagnosis of dyslexia, it requires a huge investment on the part of a family or a district to pay for a full diagnostic evaluation from an educational psychologist who will affix that label onto a student. And in some states, you need that label to get the services that kids need to be successful. So getting kids identified is sort of a prerequisite for getting them on track to have the district pay for the kinds of remediation that the kids need to be successful. I it took me sort of a long time to kind of get on the bandwagon of supporting that process, because I did feel it was unfair to some families who could not afford that, right? So I actually, although I believe in dyslexia and I support dyslexia, I believe the kids should start getting the services as soon as they show that they need it, as opposed to having to go through that whole process of getting identified and labeled. So I, even though I target some of my work to kids who've already been identified because that's how their parents find me, all my kids are not identified as experiencing dyslexia. Many of them just have the symptoms that have led their parents to try to find the instruction that they think their kids deserve. Does that make any sense as a frame of reference?
All right, Shaheen, how about yourself? What's your background and experience with diverse learners?
So unlike Karen, my background or experience is not with teaching reading to kids who have dyslexia or special needs, but rather I think I come from the approach that everybody learns differently, and their learning styles help or hinder how they're going to retain information, how they're going to let it, first of all, sink in, and how they're going to then apply it. And so I've always, and as a homeschooler, you kind of think a little differently in how you teach. It's not the traditional school model anyway. And so for me, with my 4 own kids, each one having their own different learning style, it kind of moved me to kind of come up with different ways of teaching the same material, because I would see my kinesthetic learner did not take in the material just, as well as my auditory learner did when I sat there and talked to them about it. And first of all, it doesn't matter to me what I'm teaching, it matters how much they're taking in. Because I could go through all the preparation and teach it, but if they don't catch it, it's very different. Now it's like there's no point. I've been going through a whole hour and they've not received the instruction that I've been trying to pass on. So for me, the diversity of the learners comes more from their learning styles and their learning preferences, and then also how I choose to teach that material. And so I've kind of learned on this on my own, and then also built upon it through my training as in my master's, to kind of focus in on different ways of teaching the same material so that we're not losing anybody in the group. And so that's kind of my background and why I chose to kind of focus on diverse learners. So it was more on helping with their abilities and strengths rather than focusing on their inability to comprehend or take something in.
Karen,
I just want to just throw something on top of that. There's a saying that it often isn't a student who's experiencing a difficulty learning. It's the teachers that are having difficulty teaching it in a way to meet the student's needs. So instead of trying to label the learner with a problem, which I find problematic, right? Let's look at our own practice and see what we can do. Exactly, Jane, to adapt to the learners.
Yes.
To adapt to the learners. If it doesn't work one way, then don't keep teaching it the same way, right? If it's not working, then you have to find another way to access the children's abilities. Yeah.
Yep.
So based on what you guys are talking about, meeting the learners where they're at, essentially. Can you talk about some ways teachers can maybe figure out what those learners' strengths are and how to teach to them?
Sure.
Go ahead, Shaheen.
So I think in the setting of Outschool, and I'll speak from that perspective, the very first thing is to kind of identify your class, what is your class going to require, and what is your class going to need from the student, for instance. So when you read my class descriptions, I kind of very clearly say needs to be a fluent reader, or whatever I think the student will need to be successful in my class. And I put it in the class description. The other thing is to be open to understanding what the students need. So I even put in a note, if the parent would like to reach out with I have a learner who has difficulty speaking in class, because my class description will say must be, will require, I can't remember everything that I've written, but something to the fact that, you need to be able to read fluently, you will be required to speak in class, and this will be a discussion-based class. And so I give them understanding of what is expected of them. And then I always leave room for the parent to reach out saying, okay, my child is at this level or not at this level, or can do this or cannot do this. And then we get into a discussion on email if that is the case. So first of all, being open and available. What is it that you expect from your students in each class? And how are you planning to teach this class? And it tells them that this class will run using blah, 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 or whatever. And so people know what they're signing up for. I'm just speaking from the Outschool perspective, for instance, right? And then I had in one case, and I'm just going to go into a quick short story here, but I had a case where a parent reached out to me and said that they have a special needs learner who they would like a completely different class for. First, they asked, the first class that they said was, my child is very interested in this poetry session that you're teaching. Can my child, take your class, but they're not going to be speaking because they're non-communicative. So they will only be able to use the chat. And to me, that was fine. I said, as long as they're engaging with the material, the modality of how they engage is not an issue, I welcome them. And the participant, did take the class. The video was off, and the entire class, they were using the chat and very engaged with the material. And I was very impressed. And after the class, the mom sent an email saying, this has been great. I would love for my child and a few of his friends to take your class, all of whom are non-communicative. And I had never experienced that. And I was, I didn't even know what the terminology meant. And I had to kind of look it up. And I welcomed them. And she suggested that, so this was all parent initiated. And so she suggested that we do a class just for non-communicative learners. So I set up a private session on Outschool, and they all signed up. And it was a 6 weeks course on global poetry. And that was the most humbling experience for me, because this was the first time in my life that I had 6 or 8 students, ranging in age from about 8 years to almost 16 years, who participated in a class, none of whom were communicative. And everyone had to be on the chat. So it was interesting because the recording seemed a little funny. It was just me and my slides talking, right. And then I would pause because I was reading all their comments. But a wonderfully engaged class, to the point that I was just, I was amazed. I was just like, I was inspired. And at the end of, every session, I would just be like, oh my God, because these were students who were really facing challenges, because there was a couple of times when accidentally the audio would go off, or meaning go on from one of the family side. And I would hear, sounds and grunts. And these were children who were not able to even make vocal sounds to make a word. And there were others who were so hyper. They had one of the student I remember was running through the house because they couldn't sit. And the parent or the caregiver was running behind them with the iPad so they could still keep hearing the material. Yeah. Right. So we're not just talking people who cannot, sit down and understand concepts. We're talking people who have difficulty on so many levels. Mm-hmm. And yet what was coming back from them was so impressive. In fact, one of the students, the one whose mom initiated the whole thing, at the end, I found out that this young man runs a blog for children who have similar non-communicative, abilities. And in his blog, he mentioned this class and mentioned Outschool and mentioned how this has impacted or really just helped with their learning. And and they sent it to me and I forwarded it to Outschool. I was just, it was really so humbling. And I was just completely floored because, one, I had no experience, and 2, any kind of formal training, but it was just the ability to share the love of the material that I had with people who were receptive in whatever way that worked for them. And I think that openness is really what, that one incident really inspired me to keep offering more. But beyond that, I think it is our openness and our willingness to engage all types of learners that's so important. And not see, oh my God, what do I do now? And how I don't know, my whole class is discussion based and I have non-communicative learners. How is that going to work? But saying, well, let's try it and see how it does work.
Awesome. That's a great story. I remember that blog. It was really, really cool. So Karen, how about you? What inspired you to create classes here on Outschool for some of these diverse learners, and how do you, as a teacher, meet them kind of where they're at and assess that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I usually have either an email or phone conversation with the parents. If it's in a multisensory phonics class, I tend to have that phone conversation or very detailed email correspondence. For my Latin and Greek roots and affixes classes, it's typically just by email, because the phone conference thing is aspirational. Yeah. But I try to get feedback from the parents so I have some insight. I also start every course with the kids sharing a lot about themselves. It takes time, but I learn a lot from those initial shares where they talk about themselves and they meet each other. I take a lot of notes. I'm always formatively assessing and informally informatively assessing as I'm going along, taking notes about particular students and their ways of interacting and their struggles, and trying to adapt my practices to help. And then I can unpack those things and write parents later if I have particular suggestions of how they might, of how we might adapt things to allow the student greater participation in the future. It is challenging because there are some students who won't speak on camera or won't turn on their camera, and trying to make space for them in a group of very chatty social kids is interesting. So making sure to pause and throw a direct question at someone and say to the other kids, let's wait, so-and-so is going to type, right? And knowing some students have aides that are helping them with the typing. Some students have parents who are actually quite involved, and I make sure that that's not a negative, but that the parent is considered to be part of the learning community, so the kids don't feel like the parent is big brother watching. Mm-hmm. So that can, I think all those things can be a factor. Differentiating, I guess, is the word we have to use as teachers. Differentiating our prompts, differentiating what we request of learners depending on their strengths and their needs. Also, I find a really important thing for many learners is I struggle with this, but to give more wait time, mm-hmm. especially for the students who are less verbal or who are more shy, and to just quiet the group down and say, we're going to wait because we need to let people think. I think that's important. Letting students respond in a silent brainstorm via the chat or on a slide or on a whiteboard, I think is useful. And another thing that I find in my field, again, in literacy, is breaking tasks down for students step by step. And some students need to be coached step by step each time to do something successfully. And so I have to use consistent routines with a number of students so that we do it the same way every time so that they can learn how to do it independently. And I can teach for that.
Cool. I'm going to follow up here. You said that, parents sometimes are there to help the kids, and you want to make the parent part of the learning community. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that, or what you mean by that?
Well, many of our parents are homeschooling parents, and in my field, they're usually reaching out to me because they're having a hard time developing their students' literacy abilities to the extent that they want them to be. So I set it up as a partnership. So from the very first conversation, I make sure the parents know that I'm there to team with them. I create all my learning materials in Google Apps, and I share those with the parents so that they have that in their Google Drive. And I actually create homework resources, like I call it homework, but things that the parents can do with their children in between their time with me, so we can increase the quality of the intervention. And I have the parents observe my routines, and and work with them on developing their own routines so that we're consistent with each other. And so even though I may only have the kids 80 minutes a week, the parents are ideally working 15 to 20 minutes a day with their kids using the materials that I provide. And I think that gives more of an intensity that is ordinarily required to make a difference. So I sort of view what I do partly as I don't want to say coaching the parents so much as facilitating their success. Does that make sense?
Yes, that is awesome. Thank you. The parents really can play a pivotal role in helping their learners and giving you insights and, you know, all of those sorts of things. I've been ignoring Julie. I'm pretty bad at that. Julie, do you have any thoughts or questions to share?
No, I'm enjoying all of the stories and tips. So
Okay.
thanks you all.
All right. So what impact do you think that Outschool, like this video format, has on diverse learners? Some challenges that may be created by it, or even, you know, some opportunities like Shaheen talked about, where the kids who were non-conversational could take a class. Shaheen, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think for a lot of what we call special ed kind of students, this Outschool platform has become an amazing resource. One, of course, being able to have live interaction with teachers, regardless of where they are, both the students and the teachers. And I remember, you know, years ago when I first started off with Outschool, I remember a teacher who, and I'm sure I'm thinking she's still around. I don't know. I haven't checked. But, you know, she would take her iPad and they would go on nature walks, and she would start talking about all the plants and the herbs in her yard and in her, because she lived out in nature, basically. Right. And so it was such a way of bringing the instruction to the students, bringing the class to them. So things like that, this is not possible unless you're physically taking a field trip and being present. And there was a teacher who was teaching from Hawaii and was talking about all of the landscapes of Hawaii and walking around and showing it to them on her iPad or her phone. Now that's not possible. It's not like I can just take a field trip to Hawaii tomorrow with my class or my students. And so I think those are the positives of being open and available and accessible to everyone, regardless of where the person is and where the teacher is. That is a great resource. There was another teacher I remember who was teaching a class on the farm and had all this farm equipment and animals that she was showing. You know, for somebody like us who live in the city, it's wow, you know, animals do this thing. You know, it's just amazing to be able to connect those pieces, while at the same time, when we are talking, for instance, the lows, sometimes for students who are extremely shy, having the forced video becomes a hindrance. They are unwilling to speak, and they become really kind of closed. Or sometimes, and I've seen this because I have some classes that are multi-aged. And so you'll have a young student and an older student, and then either the older student I will see will kind of shut off the video in a little bit, or the younger one will. One or the other will go off because I guess they just feel a little uncomfortable. They will participate by chat, by speaking, but the video goes off at some point. And I don't force it. I at the beginning of every class, I mention, you know, I would love for this to be a discussion. You know, I'll keep your videos on, keep your audios on, and I do a quick technology check to make sure everything's working with students, so that before we get started, everyone can hear, speak, and I can see, and they can see. But after that, if they choose to shut the video down but still keep participating, I have no problem with that. I give them that space because sometimes that's what they need. Another positive thing about this technology has been I've had students taking classes while on the road. You know, they're literally in the car on their mom's phone. Sorry, we forgot about today's class, but mom has to drop someone off, but I'm here. I can, you know, and they'll have the headsets on, listening, participating. So I think it's been a blessing for a lot of people to have a platform like Outschool allow, you know, for them to participate regardless of where they are and what time of day. In fact, I've had students, I had one that really stuck with me was a student in Korea who took a class at their 3 a.m., you know, and to me, I was kind of like, whoa. And she said, yeah, I really wanted to take this class. And so this was the only time. And I was like, wow, okay. Because every time, you know, that was what the time zones did. But she still took it. right? And was active and participating and everything. So it just shows you the power of technology and how it's really changing learning and making it so accessible. And I think it's just to us to use it to our best interest and abilities.
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was going to add on to that. I've had clients that I work with in person who find the drive time, getting to a place, you know, they would complain, teenagers especially, this takes my whole day, right? And so if I move them into an online format, they're much more amenable to logging in and having the weekly lesson because it fits in more neatly into their lives without the whole commute added on to both sides of it. So I've liked that a lot. We also have a lot of world schoolers. Is that the term? People who travel and they're homeschooling families, but in a maybe a less formal setting where their travel is part of the adventure. And those families, I think, really value the Outschool platform as a way to get some topical classes of interest while they're exploring the world.
So Karen, I know I'm jealous of those world school families.
Me too.
I keep trying to convince my kids we should do it, and they don't want to. So Karen, can you talk a little bit about some challenges or benefits of being in an online setting like this for kids who have diverse learning needs?
Well, I'm trying to do a multi-sensory language program where I can't be completely multi-sensory because I can't do the kinesthetic side with them directly. And that part is harder. I've had to adapt some of my methods a little bit versus the way I would do, say, Wilson Reading System or Orton Gillingham in person. Had to adapt it a little bit to work with what we've got, and then count on parents to do a little bit more of the kinesthetic part on their end. So that's a little bit challenging, but I think that there's some other things that I think help focus the kids' attention more. For example, I think the video camera offers a real immediacy to students that focuses their attention even more than being in a room with 8 people, because the camera like literally zooms in on what the kids should be focusing on usually. And that can be very beneficial. I also find, I mentioned I use Google Apps, but that's because I have a lot of print material to share with kids. And I also share books on Kindle or from my Scribed account. And I can really focus their attention with my mouse, highlighting certain things, pointing to certain things. And I think that is sort of the equivalent of in person, pointing to something on the desk. And so I think the technology actually works very smoothly for teachers, at least in my discipline. I've been very pleased with it.
Cool. Do you find that learners who maybe have, I don't know, like ADHD or Asperger's or, something like that, is it more challenging for them online, do you think, or?
That has not been my experience, but it could just be the nature of the classes that I teach that I haven't found that to be an issue.
Okay.
At most of the time, if a parent hasn't revealed that information to me, I really wouldn't know, because most of my learners are so involved that I often don't know. And I think that's good, because then I'm not teaching to, I'm not letting my preconceived notions get in the way of my relationship with the student. So
do you think the fact that your classes are interactive help kind of, I don't know, even that out or something like that?
I think so. In the small classes, like I don't teach, my largest group is 9. So when I'm working with literacy learners, struggling literacy learners in a multisensory class, I cap at 4. My other classes, I cap at 9, because that's as many as I feel like I can pay attention to at once. So it's my attention difficulty that I'm controlling for, not theirs.
Right. Yeah, I understand that feeling too. So we did have a question by one of our audience members here, and I may have lost it a little bit.
Oh, it's up in the chat.
I think it's the one from Nancy.
Oh, Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
What suggestions do you guys as panelists have for new Outschool teachers? Things that would help them get started on the platform. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, this comes up a lot on the Facebook page. So first of all, if you're new to Outschool, make sure you join the Facebook group for Outschool teachers, because there's a great dialogue that happens on that page. And a lot of people kick in throughout the day. It creates a wonderful professional network for us as teachers. So people always seem very interested in developing something sellable, but I also would say to teachers, teach what you're passionate about, and don't worry if there's other people in your niche, because they're going to be. It's a very big marketplace, but I've said on the Facebook a few times, it's a crowded marketplace in terms of the fact that there's a lot of us teaching on it, but it's also crowded with learners from all over the world. So if there's something that you want to teach, that you're passionate about, that you know you're good at teaching, offer that class. Don't try to invent all these other little classes of things that aren't really what you're best at necessarily, because you're spending a whole lot of time developing curriculum when you could be spending time recruiting learners for the things that you've already got developed. Does that seem like reasonable advice?
That's the number one thing. The first thing I say in the Rookies Improving Together course is teach what you love. You're going to distinguish yourself that way. It shines through with your description. And obviously when you're teaching, you can see that passion that the teachers have for the material, and it really does bode well. Shaheen.
So what to do as a new teacher? I think for me, one of the things that, especially if you are a parent who has kids on Outschool, I would also say take or watch some of the classes that your child takes with other teachers who are really good. When you read a review and you say, oh, this teacher is really great, and your child shows interest in that class, sign them up and then watch how that teacher teaches, because sometimes the best way to learn is by watching someone. Right? So if your child's taking a class on Outschool and then you're watching how that teacher is teaching, you're getting tips as well. So I've seen that as something, of benefit, because working with Outschool, I've had the opportunity to kind of just watch, and it's been an amazing experience. Like, oh, that's great. And then the other thing I feel like as a new teacher on Outschool, just be very clear in your description. I know, just explain yourself. It does two things. One, of course, it informs the people who are going to sign up for the class what to expect and what you're going to be teaching. But two, I think it clarifies for you your objectives. What are you planning on teaching, and how are you going to get through it? Because if you only have an hour, how are you going to accomplish all this in an hour? And sometimes writing it down and seeing that gives you an opportunity to just take a step back and go, oh yeah, okay, that's not going to happen. Maybe this needs to be a 3-week course, or maybe I need to cut some stuff out, right? But I think just that kind of clarity, and sometimes not in our mind, but on paper or in front of us, helps us see better, and that, it helps us navigate. And then always be flexible, because maybe, and this has happened with one of my classes where I started off as a 6 weeks course, and then I had to expand it to an 8-week course, and now it's a 10-week course. Why? Because British literature is that vast. And when you've got the interest going, you're like, well, maybe I should add, oh, well, okay. And so be flexible. Just because you start off with one thing doesn't mean that's the end all be all. Be willing to grow, be willing to adapt. And I think another really key thing is feed on the feedback. It is there for a reason. If parents are giving you feedback, if they're taking that time to give you feedback, because you don't always get feedback, but when you do, those people have put some thought into it, and they really are, they're carrying, it could be completely negative, it could be positive, but if there is feedback coming in, just heed it. There's no point in just going, well, they didn't like it, fine. But rather, what is it that I did? And you have access to your recordings. You can go back, you can watch it yourself, and you can say, well, ooh, that didn't look right. Or, that was not what I was thinking. Again, these are just self-improvement strategies. When you have done a class, And especially if it's your first couple classes, watch your own recordings and see how you feel and what you think. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I need to get out of this room because the lighting is so bad, or I need to just, change this a little bit, or, oh, when I'm holding this up, it doesn't look right on the screen, but that feedback you can catch yourself. So use that opportunity to learn and grow from.
Yeah, that's great advice. It is hard to watch yourself sometimes, but it definitely you definitely can notice some tweaks that you can make. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was going to say, based on something that Shaheen just said, she was talking before about thinking of your goals ahead of time. There's an idea in education. We say, begin with the end in mind. Really think through what it is you want students to know and be able to do by the end of a session, and what you want them to know and be able to do by the end of let's say you're teaching a multi-week live or flex course, and think strategically how you can build in the experiences to help those students achieve those goals in I don't want to necessarily say measurable ways, because a lot of us teach ungraded classes, but in ways where you can see some evidence of those goals being achieved. And that kind of backward design, I think, is really helpful. So to a new Outschool teacher, I would say, slow your roll a little bit, maybe some new teachers, and think ahead, do all the planning ahead, get it on paper, get it planned out, get your materials ready, so that when you start to teach, it's all there for you. You're not thinking this week, oh, what am I going to do next week? Or what am I going to do the week after? You've thought the whole sequence through. And if you can design courses, at least for me, I found, and maybe I'm in a particular niche here, but I found if I can design, like I want to do a big topic, let me take the first layer and put it in a course. And then I'm going to then, I know there's more layers later. I'll do those and then add on, so I can build a following from course to course, where people who start with me in the first course who are interested in topics, some of them will roll into the next level and keep rolling along. And the people who do that gets smaller, winnows over time, right? But if you can think strategically about something where you develop an interest in a knowledge, and then kids can carry that over into the next course with you, and so on, that might be a way to build up some business over time, as opposed to thinking of everything as being separate, like a one-shot deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. All right, we are getting close to our end time here. So audience, if you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A or in the chat, as some people have been doing. Oh, I had a question in mind with the design with the end in mind, and it just popped out of my head. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Julie, do you have any questions or insights?
No, I guess that I wanted to share, just because it's only in the chat. Jane had shared some advice that she got from a teacher who was working with one of her own learners, her daughter who was in special ed pre-K, and the teacher gave her some advice after the program had ended and said, use the opportunity to respond, and made the point that live and interactive can be so great and so much better than YouTube in that way, to give students the opportunity to respond. And Karen, you chimed in on that, so I wonder if you wanted to expand, or Shaheen, if you want to expand on that one as well.
I haven't tried to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, sometimes, we get, as human beings, I think all of us get a little intimidated with silence. And silence is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It just sometimes means that somebody's thinking and formulating their thoughts. And we just kind of assume if there's silence, is everything okay? Can you hear me, guys? That's the first response, because it's technology. And then the second response is, okay, who wants to share? And what do you have to say? Sometimes we poke and prod a little too much. And it's not necessarily the best thing. We can just kind of give it a minute. And one of the things that I've done in my classes is, when I put up questions or I ask questions, I always say, okay, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think about this before you respond. And if you're ready, just give me a thumbs up, but we'll wait. and it forces everyone to just pause and think. Some of them, I see the thumbs up go up right away. Like, I got it already, and I'm going to be thinking as I've got my thumbs up. But it, forces everyone to take a minute to just collect their thoughts. And I always say, okay, collect your thoughts and then put it in a sentence from start to finish. Like, think it through, speak it through in your mind before you share. And with the younger kids, it's just a habit building thing where you force them to stop and think and speak correctly, and then you get a complete answer that is really thoughtful. But so my thing has been, don't fear the silence, but kind of just embrace it. And in fact, train the students as well. And because I also teach public speaking on Outschool, I talk about, okay, conversations or speaking is a two-part thing. One is the speaking, but the other is the listening. And you want to listen to what the other person is saying, then you can respond. That's how it works. So you can't always be talking, and you can't be afraid if there's silence going, what's going on. So, and as teachers, I think it's important for us, we tend to say or think, if somebody's not speaking or if I'm not getting a response back, something's wrong. And I think we have to kind of change our mindset and go, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just we're giving them time to process.
If you have learners that you're seeing several weeks in a row, I think creating a homework assignment that front loads the coming week's discussion can be useful. So like you did for our talk today, having the questions in advance, giving the kids time to brainstorm what they're going to want to talk about, maybe get some written notes or at least get it organized in their minds, I think can be helpful. If it's just a one-time class, you could do like a quick write where you pose a question and like, Shaheen suggested putting it up on screen. You can have the kids writing in their own notebooks or on their own whiteboards to get their ideas down, even if it's just a few words. So making more time for that, I think, is important for all of us. Setting
Awesome.
for success. So
awesome, thank you. So the last question I would like to ask you is, you both come from different backgrounds. Karen's a trained teacher, trained in reading specialist, and Shaheen is an educator, but kind of taught herself some of the ways to work with more diverse learners. What do you think is the most important thing for teachers to know or approach to use when working with diverse learners? Karen, I'm going to start with you.
I just think start with strengths and interests, build on the strengths. You're also gently remediating the limitations, but don't hyper focus on the things that kids struggle with. Always approach it from a position of strength. So can I give one little example?
Yes.
I always, when it comes to reading and spelling, I always position students' difficulties relative to the complexity of the English spelling system, English orthography. So I make sure my students understand why English is a hard language to read and spell. And they know the story of English and how English is kind of a mix of words that come from Germanic and Old Norse and Latin and French and Greek, and how those pieces come in. And even and so when they are having trouble with something and we're trying to develop a strategy for it, I can help them see, this pattern is hard to spell because this is the French layer. And so it's not the kid who doesn't know how to do it. It's the language being complex. And I can give the kids the strategy to unpack it. So it's not their weakness. It's not their problem. The problem is it's a complicated language. And that frees kids up a little bit to be curious about it instead of having to be defensive about their own difficulty. Is that
wonderful?
Yeah. You've kind of hit on that a couple of times, and I think that's really a great thing to focus on. It's not the kid that's having the difficulty learning, it's the teacher trying, the method that the teacher is using, or the language that they're working with, or that's great advice. Shaheen.
So for me, I think the key has been patience. You just have to be patient as a person, as a teacher, as a mom, whatever role you're taking, it's about being patient. And then second, being really just forthcoming with your, and being very generous with the positive feedback. Because we tend to go, yeah, good job, and move on, but actually being very specific with the feedback. I really liked how you focused your ideas in sharing, or your thoughts on this line of poetry, or that was a great example of metaphor that you picked out. But being very specific, because then now, good job or great is sure, okay, what does that mean? Whereas now they know, oh, I really did that. I understood metaphor really well, or whatever it is, that your feedback is so specific and really just encompassing. It encourages them to do more. And I think that those are the two strategies that I feel have been really helpful to me. One is just being patient, and the second is giving them feedback that they can take and say, she's not just saying that because that's what she says to everybody, but she's actually paid attention to what I have done, and now she's responding back directly to something that I have done, right? So that's another key thing for me is when you're listening to the students, then you pay attention to what their strengths are, and then focus in on that and go, I really enjoyed how you did this, or thank you so much for that. And it's specific enough that they know, oh, she actually cared to listen, and it makes a huge difference, because now they're ready to do more.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you both for your time and your insights today. We really appreciate you being willing to help us out, and you gave us some just wonderful things to think about and to practice in our own classrooms. So we greatly appreciate that. And for those of you in the audience, thanks for joining us. And we hope to continue some of this conversation on Facebook as well. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Bye. Bye, Laura. Bye, Julie. Bye, Shaheen.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you all.
Nice meeting you too. Bye.
Thank you.